me introduce myself. J.R. Arredondo. It's a mouthful. Just JRA. If you want to get this deck, something that I did last week and over the past few days is ran through the demos, click by click, and took snapshots for you. So basically, you have now a deck that is like 70 slides or whatever, and you're going to have step by step all of the little snippets of important areas where you have to click through if you want to replicate the scenarios. Something that is really frustrating for me when I'm in your place and attending is that you want to, so for example, this morning, I was at one of the new XNA Phone 7 development sessions, and I was thinking, this is amazing, right? This is great. I can do this. I can create a game and go back to, when I was writing games for fun. But then I realized, yeah, everything just kind of disappeared, right? And it's gone. So hopefully those screenshots are useful. Now, there are two kinds of people, right? There are people that are very nice and people that are very rude. So some people are going to walk out and leave in the middle and distract everybody, and other people are so nice that they don't want to leave because they don't want to embarrass or upset the presenter, right? And so, your company sent you this way. They probably spent thousands of dollars to fly you up here and to pay for the conference. So this is your chance to leave the room, right? This is great. On your left side, you are in the right room if you manage databases for a living in your organization, or if you create them. Or maybe you have SharePoint and your users are starting to ask you about how to use SharePoint to manage Access databases because they've heard about it since we launched this at the end of 2009. Or maybe you're one of those users that is looking more proactively, one of those IT people looking proactively, how do I enable my business users to actually be more productive with something like Access that is easy and approachable and something manageable like SharePoint. Now you're in the wrong room on your right side, right? You want to learn about Access application development? Not this session. If you thought that Access related to identity management, not a good session either, but you can go to, let me tell you where to go. Yeah, you can go B313. That is a good session over there. You can leave now, not a problem. If you are interested in mission-critical, enterprise mission-critical application development, well, SQL Server, Azure, Visual Studio, plenty of sessions. Go to B314 for developer and collaboration solutions in the cloud with SharePoint, or hybrid cloud management with System Center, right? For those people that are interested in enterprise business service management, System Center, discovery, provisioning, and all those big fancy terms. I come from that space. It's a space that is really close to my heart. Go ahead and you can leave the room now. So hopefully at the end of the session, you will learn how to take control of your existing databases. You will learn how to manage the deployment of your applications in SharePoint, and hopefully extend your existing applications with web databases. That's the term we use in Access to refer to the instantiation of an Access client application on a SharePoint site. And you will learn how to manage rapid application development. Everybody talks about rapid application development. It's one of the big buzz. I'm a Scrum Master. I always, people are thinking of Agile and Scrum, XP for those of you old timers, right? But it's never been done, or it's never done in a managed way, right? You always have to have the rest of the infrastructure in order to enable configuration management, right, for those applications. But Access is a self-contained runtime and application development infrastructure that allows for that. So you will be able to learn how that happens, and in addition to that, how to manage this data in a central way, and also deploy your interfaces and your logic to a SharePoint central site. So quick poll, give and take. I give you something, you give me something. I want to know, out of these people, let's say 100%, how many of you are developing apps in Access? Sorry about that, developing applications in Access. So I get One, there were a few people that actually lowered their hands, so a very small group of people. And then on the other side, people that are in charge of managing the IT infrastructure or the environment, the IT for access or access-like applications. So the majority of you are on the right side, right? Now, as usual, I used to be a developer in IT and then business unit IT way back when, before I joined sort of more product development organizations. And we were always in love of the infrastructure, but there was a team, a group of people that hated us, right? The operations people, right? The 95% of the people here. They hated us because we were creating new applications and making changes every day. You guys wanted to keep the stability of the infrastructure. You didn't want to touch the server. We wanted to touch it every day or every hour to make a change. So that is the tension that exists, right? Out of those people, the 95% of you who raised your hand, tell me something that you do not love about Access applications. Somebody want to raise a hand right there, sir? Okay. They proliferate like cancer. Data integrity and locking issues. Version compatibility, that's a good one. The old ones never get updated. What do you mean, by whom? By the developer?
A vendor sells you something that's in Access XP.
I see what you're saying, yes. You're right. They never get updated. They're so good that they never get updated. Sir? Not documentation for the app and no security. Very similar. Right, exactly. But is that unique to Access though? That's not, right? That happens everywhere. Yeah. Of course, and who has to get up? The guy with the pager, you, right? I used to be in operations for a month, and then I just decided to go back to development. Multiple copies of exactly the same data. The third point. Anybody else? I think we covered the spectrum of all the problems that actually are good in Access. Now, 5% of you or less are people like myself, right? There are developers. You're about to create an application and make a difference for your business. Who cares about these other 95% of the people, right? They have to carry the pages. They get paid a lot in order to do that. And at the end of the day, you get paid to make a difference for a team, for the department, maybe for the business unit, right? So let's take a look at that sort of relationship between business units and the IT department. And this IT department, I use it as a very sort of idealized way, right? Every organization has different ways to basically organize the IT teams, right? There is a big central group, core IT. I used to be part of that as well. Or there is a business unit IT group, right, that is funded and paid for by a division, right? A set of sort of major groups or major products that get aggregated into a corporate division. And in some cases, there is actually sort of a more informal relationship between those organizations. And then there is a bunch of people sprinkled around the org called administrators or server admins or admins, paid for by whoever has budget, right, to make sure that things stay up and running. So I call this a paradox, right, because this tension really has these three roles. These developers, the 5% of you, right, they're really just listening to that person over there on the green shirt, the business user who says, I just wish I had the ability to do this. I had this great idea, but I just don't know. I'm not technically inclined. I don't know what to do. But the application developer went to school and learned code, right? They learned the ability to morph these lines of code in text in Notepad or C#, right? Depending on your favorite language and editor. And you can create things out of nothing. You learn from that person what is needed, the requirement, and then you create something. And creating something is rather easy. Unfortunately, there is this other guy, the gentleman on the blue shirt, the operations team, the 95% of you, who really are looking for something else. They are looking for stability of the infrastructure, governance, control, centralized stuff so that I can manage it. Otherwise, if it's all distributed, what happens with distributed stuff? We talked about it, right? They replicate like bunnies or like cancer, right? And they create problems for me. I have to get up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and I don't want to do that, right? Because then guess who's calling? The CIO calls, right, and says, hey, I'm seeing my little Christmas light application, BMC software, Microsoft Systems Center, and all the lights are blinking red. What's wrong, right? And so this person is interested in addition to the upkeeping of the infrastructure, in keeping costs to a level that is manageable by the organization, right? Because if we have all of these services scattered all over the organization, guess what is that? If you aggregate all those thousands of dollars, that adds up to a lot of money. But if you consolidate the infrastructure, then you can manage it. You can go to a vendor like Microsoft or like Dell and HP and buy servers in bulk, right? And so that's what these people are trying to do. And so this is the paradox. That's the tension that exists between these two organizations. By the way, I'm going to show you these slides, and then we're going to go into demos. But I think it is important for us to sort of realize how this is, because we're going to go back. We're going to go back to our organizations, and we want to explain in some terminology, in some metaphor, a message that other people can grasp and do something about, right? Otherwise, we're just going to learn the techno-geek stuff that you can still learn, because you're going to get all those click-throughs and everything. But I think, this can be useful. So I'm going to tell you a little short story. This is actually from my own experience. So obviously, we said, we started with this assumption of these two people. But why does that happen, right? It happens because we have an IT organization that has limited resources, particularly lately, as of late, or maybe in the past 10 years, right? And they're typically just full of work, working at full capacity, right? Anybody here can relate to that? Everybody, right? For the past, even in product development, right? It's just everybody wants to do more with less, and more and more and more with less and less. So obviously, what happens, there is this ritual that I call this little semi-year by every 6 months or whatever, depending on the organization, where people standing on a little platform like me talk to little people standing over there and say, I'm sorry, I only have resources for 10 projects. Figure it out. Right? And so everybody is raising their hands. I have this project, I have that project. They fill in these little Excel spreadsheets with cost and ratios and benefit analysis, right? And those things get rolled out. Nobody cares about how you put it together. They rolled up into some macro figures. And then somebody does a big sort in Excel, descending order, and they filter the top 10 rows. And so that gets done, and then guess what happens? There is a big announcement, and the CIO sends a memo or an email, and in a very sort of flowery way, announces the plan for the next period of planning. And that's a big deal, right? Because now everybody, at least those 10 people, they are just very happy. Those still people go party because now they go, I got the backing of IT. They are going to help me with my business need, my new customer side, my new e-commerce application, my new customer tracking, my new way of invoicing and billing. The question is what happens to 11 and the rest, right? Because I used to be in both of these sides, and I used to be in the top 10. We got selected. Was working for Compaq and HP, right? We wanted to do a new way of doing e-commerce, and we got picked. We got picked as a strategic project. Then at some other times in my life, I've been one of those 11th or the rest, right, where nobody cares about you. You have to go home. You just made it right underneath that red line in that Excel spreadsheet. However, we all know the reality of this. We all have servers hidden under our desks, and we've coded against them. Because those people, just because that CIO said, I'm sorry about these, I'm going to pay attention only to those top 10 projects, it's not like those people have no business. They're not going to go and quit or fire themselves. They still got a business to run. And they're going to grab it, and they're going to just go for it. Guess what happens once you build something and you like it? You start using it, right? People start using it, and then once they start using this little tiny application, they actually love it so much, and they go like, wow, this is growing too much. I'm going to give it to my IT guy. They're going to be so proud of me. Right? Who are the ones smiling? Are they correlated to the 95% of you? Right? Because they come to you, they schedule a meeting, and it's called something obtuse like transition of duties, or something that looks like a game. But it's not, right? It's only pain coming your way, right? Am I wrong, 5%? The 5% are just like the ones laughing. The other ones are laughing nervously, right? Because that's really their lives. And so obviously that is the big surprise, right? Because, whoa, you open the box and it's not like it's going to be some nice little wrapped little candy that you're just going to put in a little server and it's going to run, it's going to automatically be managed, right? And the data is going to be discovered. The relationships against other servers is going to be figured out. The requirements are going to be automatically documented. The performance and availability needs come in, right? In an email automatically. Like that never happens, right? And guess who ends up holding the bag, right? One of you guys, or maybe your boss, maybe one of yourselves are actually here. Because now you were just giving that application, and really you have no idea what to do with it. Like somebody said here, the developer may already be gone. You don't have the resources to manage it. It's not like you have headcount, right, just laying around ready to manage this new application. So again, that's the story, right? What do we need then? If this is happening, if this is really true, what we need is a way to manage that. So what we're going to learn today is how do we apply this problem and solve it in Access. Now, we talked about that 10% of the applications, right, the top 10 projects. And the reality is that they are very important. They are mission critical. The enterprise needs them. It's not like that 10%, those 10 projects were arbitrarily selected. Enterprises are very good at managing resources, hopefully. And the algorithm to sort that Excel spreadsheet hopefully has some interesting financial meaning behind it, or some good customer benefit that aggregates and sort of impacts the organization overall. But for enterprise mission critical, large amounts of data, high uptime, how many nines requirements, and an expected long shelf life or long-term life, we already have tools for that, right? We already have Visual Studio, we already have SQL Server, SQL Azure. Those pieces of infrastructure are already in place, and they have their applicability. So how do we help these people? That's what we're going to learn about today. Now, let me give you just one more, actually 2 slides. I call it just the 15 cents of theory that maybe you can use. And again, the benefit of all these slides is that you can just grab them and present them as yours, right? So there is this idea, this problem of the infrastructure that companies like Microsoft sell you, and companies like Dell, hardware and software in general. We are not making anything that is custom for yourself. We're selling the same piece of software, unless you hire our consulting services or any other consulting company. The same thing we're selling you to the guy on sitting to another person, right? It is the same piece of software. So what you do with it is essentially the same thing that your competitor already will have or has access to. So it's not very differentiating, right? It's not unique. You got the same thing. It's the same SQL Server, maybe a different version, a little more expensive. So the value gap is what these 5% of developers and their teams and organizations actually are about to create. Things that are actually different for your organization, right? And these applications typically start in this quadrant. I read this book a number of years ago, and I've used this a few times. Again, good slide to steal. CIO impacting and career enhancing. Geoffrey Moore wrote this book, Dealing with Darwin. And he talks about different business processes, right? He talks about core and context. And he says something is core if the solution drives something differentiated for the org. And something is context if it's just basics. He says, well, just because it's context, that doesn't mean it's important. An airline needs to land the airplane. It is very important, but it's not differentiating, right? It's not core. Every airline needs to land those airplanes. So it is very important. It is still critical. It is just not core in the definition, right? Some people, you may call it differentiating. Some people use different words. Then you also have applications that are mission critical and applications that are not. And what are the applications that are mission critical? Well, the things where things fall, the CIO wakes up, right? Or the things that are important, a bunch of people start moving around. If an Access application stops failing, chances are nobody's going to get paged, right? Unless it's already evolved and grown to be a significant application. So Access applications typically end up being born in that quadrant of non-mission critical core, because it's important, to the mission critical level, right? And that's the problem, right? That is the problem. So a bunch of these cancer-region applications, sir, that you call cancer, more like, let's use the word rabbit, right? They just replicate like rabbits. That's a little nicer. I'm going to use that instead of cancer. So those applications that start, getting created, and over time, some of them evolve, right? All right. More colloquially, you just don't want to be having to listen to all these people complain that you never help them. It's interesting that everybody always talks about IT and the business. Don't you find that fascinating? It's not like we are not the business. We are the business in many kinds of cases. Nobody ever asks marketing, what is your value to the business, marketing? You have a lot of these programs and campaigns, but nobody questions that. But because nobody understands the work we do, they say, we don't know what these people were doing. We had thousands of people in IT. We have no idea what those people do. Let's question them, right? So again, you would not have to listen to that whining, right? That's also very useful. Now let's transition a little bit. Now that we talk a little bit high level, things that you can bring to your CIOs, to your bosses, steal those slides, make some impact, to the tactics. And every Access application has, for those of you who have ever written one, basically two parts. Some people aggregate it in one file. Very bad practice. So most people split it in two. The top part is where you keep your interface and your logic, right? And the important thing on that one, we obviously want to make sure that there is only one version of that, right? Not many, because it's just a document, right? And so the problem with Access applications is just a document. Anybody can edit it. We want to make sure that it's easily deployable and updatable, right? Meaning, once I make a change, how do I reflect that change in every single desktop of my organization? And in addition to that, I don't want my users to have to look for it. Because what happens when people look for something, well, they make mistakes and they pick the wrong one, right? And they may start getting errors if the interface or logic has changed against the data tier, things of that nature. Then the other file, the darker box there, refers to the data. And the data is essentially something that we want to keep centrally located. We want to make sure that this repository is protected, it's in one place, and we want it to be central not because we are paranoid, we know that, but because if it's central, then we can manage it, right? It's easier to manage. We obviously want to make sure that it's backed up, we want to make sure that it's protected, right? The people have the right permissions against it. And then with the addition of SharePoint, things actually kind of jack up a little bit, right? Become a little more easier to do because we have versions and we have audits that we can run against this data, so it becomes a little easier. So how do we do this? How do we plan for all these Access databases? So I propose this 4-step process. And each one of them is going to be a combination of demos that we're going to see. So the first thing is we got to find these things. We got to find these applications because, like somebody said, they spread like rabbits. Now we need to find them. Where are they? They're in people's desktops, other people's servers. Once we find them all, hopefully we can prioritize them. Again, we don't have a lot of resources. We want to make sure that we grab the ones we can handle. Then for that application, for every one of them that we select, that we prioritize, we want to evaluate them. What are we going to do with it, right? Are we going to keep running it as is? Are we going to centralize it in SharePoint? Are we going to publish it to Access Services? Are we going to move it into SQL Server? And that's where we get to a point where we can control or have some control over all these databases. So let's focus on the first one, finding and prioritizing. And anybody here familiar with the Office Migration Planning Manager? Anybody? Not a lot of people? Well, that's good. Let's spend some time on this one. So here are the screenshots. I'm going to go through the screenshots so you guys can get the picture of everything, and then we'll actually do it. You download it, bring ONPM, download it, SUMO.exe, you extract it, and you see these 5 little folders. You have a scanning tool. This is a very geeky tool you're going to see. It's very, you can use it from my command line. Some people may want the UI or whatever, but for the 95% of you, probably like a little more control on the scripting, right? It's probably not too bad. So you have the scanning tool. Then you have a database set of utilities. You can once you scan, you bring the data into a SQL Server database, and then you have a reporting tool. So we're going to take a look at that. There's going to be an INI file. This is very bizarre, right? But it's easier to manage. So you're going to pay attention to things like my run ID, right? Because I want to run this application presumably many different times. I go and manage it. Maybe a different description. I want to know a destination path, like where am I going to keep all those logs, and where am I going to scan? And obviously, I want to make sure that I scan for Access, because this thing scans for everything in Access. Once I basically went and modified my INI, then I can actually run offscan. And that's a little tool you type. You go to that scanning folder, you type offscan, run some things, and it basically creates that little file at the bottom. It's essentially a zip file. It's a cap file. If you haven't done it already, you can create a SQL Server database where you're going to store all these logs. Presumably, you're going to centralize all this information coming into a single database so you can report against it. Then you import all those log files into your SQL Server database, right? And now you can see a bunch of these databases that you found, that you discovered. Remember, we're still trying to find all these databases that are hidden everywhere. This is a technical issue that I discovered as I started using it more. And it has to do with 32-bit. We're not going to do it in the demo, but I still want it in case you find it. And by the way, at the end, you're going to find some other resources if you ever run through problems. Some of the problems that I found as I was using the application. So I want to make sure that you guys had a little knowledge base. So you basically back up this database because you may want to restore it into a different machine. Presumably, you want to bring all these databases and consolidate them in a single place. So should we do that? Let's do that. Yeah. So it would discover all files from like MDBs and the like to ActDBs. You can configure which kinds of files. We can see that in the INI file if you want. I'm sorry. I didn't know that was a question.
All the access databases, you want to make sure they're turned off, or they can be alive?
So right now, you're just scanning them. You're not actually bringing the databases themselves. You're bringing metadata about the database. That's the metadata that we're about to see. Actually, I'm going to do the first part one, and then we're going to flip to the type of metadata. So we never actually bring the data, right? We don't want to create another copy and be part of the problem. So all right, let's do the first demo here. So I created these little steps just for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the actual commands and then actually do it. How about that? Also, when I do the following, don't think it's like some special command that only I know. It's just my own little cd change directory command. When I did this demo first, somebody said, hey, what is that /o thing? They thought it was some secret sauce from command line. It's not. All right, so how about let's take a look at the first step in the process that we talked about. Again, we got to make sure that we have the right INI settings. So let's do that. And we are going to create a new ID. Presumably, I want to change another description, the description, right, to something else. I don't think I can zoom, but let's do the following. There you go. A little better? You don't have to get the exact values, right? We're just going to give you an idea. So destination path, basically where am I going to keep all these information, all these metadata, all these log files? By default, some ONPM scan data. My long path here is just so that I can find my stuff as part of the demo. This scan or not, you know, you can go deeper and get more information like macros and the like, or decide not to. You want to make it verbose or not, recovery or not. Let me go to, you can also define certain dates. I want to only grab stuff that has been modified recently or accessed recently. Whether or not I want to scan macros as well or not. Then, where do you want to look for it? You know, if you have a standard on where your people keep the databases, presumably you can optimize and make it faster. In my case, I'm only going to scan that little, my own personal folder here called folder to scan. You can just make it everything, and you can have the ability to scan my documents. And again, this tool can be deployed through SSMS. You can put it on everybody's desktops. You can running off of a share. You can just run it on individual machines. Here's the stuff related to access. And here are the extensions that Sergio were looking for. Here are the different versions that you may want, that you are interested in. And in this case, I didn't modify the rest of the stuff. So that's step number one, our little INI file. And then we run offscan. So let's see what it looks like. So it's telling me that the run ID has already been completed on this computer. That's because I did not save the update. Let's pick another number. And it's just going to go through my little folder and it's going to scan the information. I don't know why it's a little slow. Typically, it's a little faster than that. Oh, there it goes. Great. We found a number of files. So that's just our little offscan command. Very simple. Now, obviously, when we scan all these desktops, right, we want to put them in some SQL Server database. So you presumably want to create that database. I've already created that ahead of time, and it's called AAA, just to sort it all the way up at the top, ONPM. So I'm not going to run that. There is also a delete command that you may want to take a look at. You may want to do the step 3 of creating the database ahead of time as well. That also works. And then you start importing your log files into that database. So let's run step number 4. By the way, I didn't show you this, but there is in my OMPM scan data, there should be a new file. There it is, 11:06 Pacific time. That's about right. And so, I'm sorry, what step are we in? We're already in step. Let's close that. We're going to do step 4. All right. And again, look at that. It's only going to be extracting that and importing into SQL very fast. That actually depends on the data. That I noticed as I was testing it also that it can have a significant impact on performance. You may want to just make sure that you have your exclude and your files and directories to scan, very well defined, so you don't have to spend a lot of time doing that. Great. Let's see what else we got on this one. All right, so the next step, once the database is basically, you brought up all the files into the database, then you can migrate the database, centralize it, or just run it out of this. I'm going to run it off of my other machine because I discovered that problem with the 64 version. So when everybody here knows how to to back up SQL Server database, right, and restore it. Okay, it's also in the slide, so you can see that. Let's take a look at what the information actually looks like. So now that we have this database created and all the log files are in there, then we use this little Access database, which is the OMPM reporting tool. It's actually a database in Access in itself. And you can just explore it. Let's see what this thing found. So you can see every single little file. By the way, I was running under administrator, so all the owners are going to be administrator. But one of the interesting things that I want to talk about is how this information is actually useful in you contacting the people that are using this application for more questions, right? Then some of these files are actually dummy files that I created. But here, let me find one. Actually, it may be easier on the other screen. Let me take a look at that. Or like Northwind. That was my old backup. So let's take a look at the compatibility. So here's the interesting thing. You find the computer, the domain. You can find the file itself, where it was found, the data was accessed, the size, the user, in this case, again, administrator, right? And those are the little pieces of information that can be very useful for you to know what applications or what kind of databases you want to focus on. There are some charts as well. Let me see. I think there was a chart that I thought was useful. Depending on the data, I don't have really interesting data. I have only like 50 databases, but you can see charts by version, charts by rating, by file size. There is only one big column here because the way the chart gets rendered. I think all of my databases are actually the same version. So presumably you're going to find really interesting pieces of information. But I think that the most important part, at least for me, and probably for many of you who do not know what's out there, right, is this list of files, right? The list of files, because it gives you more or less an idea of what the name of the application is, who is using it, and the like. So again, that's the reporting side of it. Let's go back. Was that a question? The first step that we talked about was to find them, right? So let's go into the next part, the interesting parts of, now that we found them, we prioritize them based on what we talked to those people, based on the data being used, maybe the size of the database, right? That's an internal process. We cannot prescribe that. But presumably you already have a process through which you go through these applications and you select the ones that you're going to focus on. So now let's talk about what are we going to do next. Here are the little charts in case you want to show it to your friends. All right. So we found these databases. Now, what are the options that we have? Let's talk about the first one. The first option is about centralizing the data in SharePoint lists and then the interface or the UX file in a document library. So let's take a look at that. The first thing that's going to happen is we're going to copy the data. We're going to grab that data, put it in SharePoint lists, and then that Access database actually now is no longer going to be working against local data, but it's going to be pointing through link tables. Anybody familiar with the link tables, right? Against the SharePoint database, the SharePoint lists. And then we can now copy the file that has no data as a document in SharePoint, and we can point people into that database. In this case, it is that assumption, right? That's a step that you would have to do, but we're going to talk about those options in this option number 3 for databases that cannot be migrated, right? We're going to still cover that. So here's what we're going to see. We're going to create a little site. Here's going to be my little task database. It's just based off the samples. Then I'm going to create a little team site. I think I already pre-created it as I was configuring the machine. Tasks 1. In the case of task, I just did something special because there is already in the template a tasks list. I'm just going to delete that. Then we're going to move the data to this SharePoint list with a click of a button. And then we're going to move the file to the SharePoint document library. So let's take a look at that. Good question. I was actually going to leave it, but let's talk about that. This actually requires the cheapest and even the free SKU of SharePoint. Option number 1, you don't have to pay much. You can just download SharePoint Foundation, and you can do this one. Option number 2 is going to require the Enterprise Cal. This is not using Xserve, just plain SharePoint. Yes. The question was, would the people that were still using the application, would those people still need access? Yes, they would still need the access SKU, the Office SKU that has access. All right. I thought I hadn't run it. Oh, perfect. I haven't done it yet. I'm just going to delete this site and restart it just in case. Oh, here we go. I haven't done it. Perfect. New site. Again, this is a little, just very plain site. I'm just going to do the special little task that we talked about for task, just because in my database I already have a task library, so I'm just going to delete that. All right, so I just have just a regular site called tasks 1, and here's my database. Now, this is the database that presumably has been running around free. We want to just a normal database, right? It's not a big deal. So the first thing we're going to do, database tools, move the data to SharePoint. That's the site I just created. Click next. Now, what is happening is for every table in my database that has data, actually for all the tables, even if they don't have data, we're creating a SharePoint list. Nothing else. And the only thing we're doing is also linking those tables to not point to anything internal. Right now they're pointing to the SharePoint list. So now if I go to my site and I refresh it, and I see the list, I can see the contacts, right, that I had. You saw that? And then I can see my tasks. And just so that you believe me, let me make a change right here in draft architecture. Create a draft architecture, right? And I'm going to refresh this, and hopefully data changes. So now the database is actually pointing to the SharePoint site, right? Everybody got that? All right. Now the interesting thing is there is still this little file floating around, right? Everybody has the file. So what I like to do is to give people a URL. So how about I just upload it? Let's wait for my machine to wake up. By the way, I just forgot to tell you something. As we did that, Access also created a backup. We're not going to need it, right? But it keeps the original version for you. And it renames the tasks database with the link tables to be the main file now. So now I can just upload that. And now what I have essentially done is I can forget about my file, right? I can forget about my task and the backup, right? And I have a URL that I can give people, right? I can just say, hey guys, just go to the tasks, and everybody's using the same copy. Now, when I open this, let me show you something. We got a few questions. Maybe the message is not the best. We get a few questions every now and then, but I want to show something to you. I'm just opening not the original one, but the one that is actually in the SharePoint library. Oh, it's trying to find the DNS. Hold on. There. You see this message? This database has been open read only. You can only change data in link tables. To make the sign changes, save a copy. What it's basically trying to tell you here is, hey, this database is read-only, meaning the designer of the database. The design of the database is read-only, right? If you are about to make a change, then you need to check it out, right? Check out the file, make a change, and then post it back in, right? It's just like a normal versioning issue here. So we just want to make sure that people don't, or the point that I'm trying to highlight here is that it is still your responsibility to manage the whole application, right? Because it's a single file. And you can use SharePoint for that. All right, that takes care of demo number 2. Let's go for the next one. The next one is just a little more sophisticated. And now, for those gentlemen who asked about access services, let's do that. Go ahead, sir. Okay, so in the example that we just saw, right? There is a document called tasks in a document library. I check it out, right? Because I have to edit it. Then I go and create a SharePoint list on my site, or create it directly in the Access database, and then make sure to repost or to check the file back into the library, right? That will be the easiest way under this model. You add the column in the existing one. You can do that. You have to do that in Access. Right. Right. Right.
Could you, if you have the lookup tables that are not changing, can you use those behind in the Access database local tables and therefore?
Not under this model. The question was, if I have lookup tables against a different table, can I do that? Right? And the answer will be no, right? Because presumably that is pointing at, unless it's in the same database, right? And then there are some rules. We have some rules, basically restrictions on SharePoint and the SharePoint SKU on under what conditions that is possible, right? So let's talk about Access services now. I'm going to skip the slides. Seems like it's working well. I was just going to show you the other spinning little diagram, right? So let's bring the task, another task copy. All right. So I'm just resetting the scenario. I'm going to go into a site right here that doesn't exist. I'm going to call this application task access services. So basically, I don't know why Outlook is trying to come. Maybe I clicked the wrong thing. So I have the same database, and now I have the enterprise queue. Remember, there was a question over there about what queue we're using. And we want to publish this database to access services. Now, there are two steps to this process. The first one is we want to make sure that before the application is published, that it is actually compatible with access services. So there is this little button, Run Compatibility Checker. I click it. Oh, yeah. It's going to say I have to close all the objects. Great. And there is a problem. This is part of the demo. I created that problem myself, just so that I can show you that scenario. And basically, we can go into this web compatibility table, and we can find this very cryptic message that says that the property value contains one or more characters that are incompatible with the web app. And the quick eye would have noticed that the control name is called %, and then complete, and it's on the it's a column, and is on the tasks table, right? And if you click on this little link, it will tell you more information about the actual problem. I'm not connected, but at the end of the slide, at the end of the deck, I have a bunch of these pointers, and you're able to go click on one of those lines and learn about all these potential problems that you're going to face, lookups and field naming problems, blah blah blah, all this, and how to fix them. So then I would just go into my tasks in design mode, and I would just change that, right, and make it %. So most times than not, it's not going to be one little problem you're going to find as usual and as you can expect. But at least you have that helper pointer there and a little bit of a description. Click on the link, huge description on the web. A lot better than the one we can give you in that field. So now I can go and publish this database. Again, run the compatibility checker. The database is now compatible with the web. I'm going to go and publish this. And I think I called it, let's see how I call it, Task Access Services. And I'm going to publish it. This takes a moment, but as it's doing it, I want to explain to you what is happening. So basically, we're shredding the application, and for every object, we're replicating the object in SharePoint. We're creating SharePoint lists. For every table, we're creating workflow for macros. If the macros are UI macros, we create JavaScript. If the macros are data macros, we create workflows, WF. If the objects are reports, we create RDL files, right, for reporting services. And hopefully, when I click OK, and I go to my little file, now I have essentially created a shredded version of this application. Again, this application is an application that is compatible with Access Services. I was able to do that. Let's make a change just so that you see how this would operate. So I'm going to go into tasks, and I'm going to create just a quick form, and I'm going to call it tasks web, just for differentiation there. And I'm going to go into options of my database, and I'm going to make that my first. This is just a little trick, so that when I open my web app, that's going to be the first form that I'm going to see. Oh, yeah. Oh, you kept the setting perfect. I don't know what it's trying to tell me there. Let's go and sync all. Now, sync all is it's a lot faster, right, than the first time, obviously. And now when I go to the web right now, presumably this is a new form, or it's a web form that I want to make accessible to people. Now I'm extending my application. Now I had a legacy application. I publish it into Access Services. And now I'm creating new functionality for it. Now, the interesting thing on this as well is that, as you saw in some of those options, the reality is that we don't have to have the file anymore. The file can also disappear because now you and I can collaborate on this application. I can grab this object and modify it. You can grab a different one and modify it. Now more than one person can actually collaborate on this application. Let's run for the third scenario. And this is the scenario of an application that cannot be made compatible, is not compatible with the web. And for this, I picked Northwind. Obviously, yes. Correct. Yeah, exactly. The entering of the data. You may not want to have editing and entering data at the same time, editing of the app, but you can definitely enter multiple people can use the application. Right. Yeah. No. People can, if you have an application that is already in Access Services, that can be multi-user. Correct. Well, in model number 1, multiple people can also use that, right? Because they're just basically pointing at the same SharePoint list with different clients. Correct. An Excel spreadsheet is a single document, right? So that's an advanced scenario. I'm going to show you this, and let's see if this answers the question. I'm going to show you just a couple of slides on this one because this can be a little complicated. All right. So as we said, sorry about that. So we have a database that is not compatible with Access Services, right? In this case, when you check it, you're going to find all these errors, right? You're going to find like 94 errors of Northwind 2007, different field names, strange character names like slashes. Then we're going to go through this little wizard, upsizing wizard. Most of the defaults actually work. I'm using 2008 R2, so you should be able to have no problems against it. And then you will see that database. You're going to get a little fancy report of what happened in the migration. And once you start copying that and you want to publish it, you also want to make sure that you delete the local copies of the database, right? Because they will stay in the database. Access is going to rename them local. Just want to make sure that you delete those. And then, obviously, once you delete those, the database is going to be compatible with the web. And then you can now, I'm sorry, that's just said, now we can now publish it to Access Services. And then the rest continues, right? So let's go ahead and do that. Move data to SQL. Let me make sure I don't have the database already there. Great. I'm going to create a new database. No, I'm just moving it. It requires SharePoint is not involved yet in this option. I'm just pushing it to SQL Server, right? So SharePoint is not involved yet, right? Okay. When I get to the end, you will, right? Access Services will require it. Not necessarily. I just deleted the space. I don't like spaces. I'm going to push all of the tables. And the rest, I can just cruise. So now the interesting, what is happening here is basically I'm creating new tables in SQL Server. I'm doing the same thing, but I'm essentially creating an application against SQL Server. Now, what is the benefit of this? If you saw in demo number 2, right, when we created that tasks access services site, what I did was first create the table, and then I was able to basically shred the application into access services, right? So that's effectively what I'm going to do here, with the exception that because this database is not compatible with access services, I'm going to move the data into SQL. You get your fancy report, right, with the upsizing services, and now my object, my access database now can be deployed similarly as I did before, right? I can copy it into SharePoint and give the UI to the users. Sir, yes, go ahead. You can do that, and there are going to be 2 things you're going to have to do. The first thing, you need to go and download for every customer that is going to use that application from the client, the new ODBC driver, right? The second thing you're going to do is in your SQL Azure subscription, you're going to have to add the IP addresses of those folks, because that's how SQL Azure controls access to the database. So 2 little steps. Everything else is the same. Just don't forget that for those of you interested in SQL Azure. Great. That's the end of all the demos. Now, I'm going to go fast on this one, but the last thing I wanted to tell you is that now once you have this application, 1 more minute and I'll be done with this, is that you can start slowly moving new objects into the web, right? You can create, again, like I did, there is a table called strings, for example, in Northwind. That table is compatible with the web. It's very simple. It's 2 fields. So I'm able to run the same process, create a new form, right, and give people in my SharePoint site access to that application, right? Did everybody get that? Just like we did in demo number 2, right? And now effectively the point that I'm trying to give you is that you're able to then slowly move this application in this advanced way of composite applications that we're starting to see, right? The question is here, where is the boundary of the application, right? And that's becoming really blurry, because people want to collaborate on some things. They want to use SQL Server for storing transactional data, right? And so it's becoming really blurry, and we're starting to see very interesting applications with this model, right? Where they use SQL Server for some data, SharePoint for data that has to do with documents or data that is too fluid, that you don't want to sort of bake the structure in the data model of SQL Server. And so I hope that now we're running out of time. So I want to leave some space for questions, but I'm going to go through 2 more slides. 1 more question in the back.
Yeah. So if I have an MDB that is already connected to SQL, that's already done a long time ago.
Right.
But it has also the complexity that it's going to stay in MDB. Can I push the MDB onto SharePoint and
Yes. So you can do that. You can effectively use a combination of model number 1 and 3, right, where you would use SharePoint as a document library for deployment and for versioning. And then clients, you would direct your users to go to that library, and they will get the latest version. Yes, sir. It's basically an Access application, right? Once your data is in SQL, you can build new queries. In Access, you can write queries against the SQL link tables as well. You cannot edit those objects. Like I cannot add a new column or remove it, but I can create a query just fine. To Access services or to my SQL Server. And essentially, you're creating a small hybrid application. I'm sorry?
How was it indexed?
What index? Because it's a...
Yeah, so I mean, if I do a search, what's going to come back? Is it going to come back in a form or report? Or am I going to
So there is data, so the majority of your data is in SQL Server, presumably at this state, right? So that will be your own search functionality. The search would also have, SharePoint has some search functionality. My recollection is not clear as to whether we give you the ability to search an Access services database that is connected to SQL. I don't know I don't think the SharePoint search scanner actually reaches that. Let me go through a couple of slides and I'll leave more questions. I'll leave space for more questions. Actually, you know what? I think I'm done. Yes.
Okay,
I was going to give you some of the resources. Go ahead.
all right, so you have a like front end to your access database, fill in the stuff, and it gives you, if you hit the button, it gives you this answer. Would you just put that onto move it to a web card, like an access web card, display the
So what I did, I just created a basic access form, right, against a piece of data that I had moved already into SharePoint. And at that point, it's just another access form. The form that you saw, tasks, is no different than any other form. We generate ASPX against it. We basically render it for you. So at that point, it just continues to be an access form. All right. So I didn't want to leave you without pointing a couple of things that I found as I was creating all these things. OMPM, main TechNet content, you can get the link. There is an interesting blog entry. Installs that you may need if you want to try it. SQL XML. We created a problem. We installed the wrong version, not the wrong version, but an older version. So if you have an older SQL server, it may not work. Or you have a new SQL server, it may not. Now you need to make sure that your SQL XML DLL is the right one. Everything else, you're going to be able to get there. Thanks a lot for coming to the session again. Hopefully this was useful.